The best lawyers aren't found in the big law firms. They're found in the stories of those who left. And I have with me today someone on the cutting edge of AI, particularly legal research, Will McCartney from HABEAS. Will, welcome to the show.
G'day, Lofty. How you going? Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. And I know you're a bit nervous, but let's start where all our lawyers who we normally interview start. When you were a little young fella, did you always think I'm going to grow up and design an AI research tool, or what did you actually want to be when you were young?
Yeah, I would have to say that when I was young, it probably wasn't on the cards at that point in time. AI wasn't too much in the framework back then in my mind. I think I was more interested in sort of reading books and all sorts of stuff when I was like a young kid, and seeing where that went in terms of, didn't have any clear sort of, when you're 4 or 5, you're not thinking too much about career, but maybe the pathway would have been more like, becoming a writer or doing something in the sort of humanities sort of field. That's what I ended up enjoying a lot in junior school and high school growing up, was those sorts of subjects. So I think there was always an inclination of doing something a little bit different, but definitely not like AI or anything engineering when I was younger.
Yeah. And so as you went through high school, did like law, was that when you started thinking about what am I going to study after school, or did you just were you a high good grade student, or?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. I was really, as I said, like, especially in my HC year, did a lot of history, English, and things like that, and ended up sort of studying after school at overseas in England for a bit, and I was doing like HSPS, which is sort of like, sociology, politics, that sort of stuff, and then I actually think I only got into entrepreneurship as like a viable career path, so to speak, after that, when COVID hit. It impacted my life in a number of ways, but also one of them being that it became the right decision to sort of move back home and for a period of time study back in Sydney. And I sort of just added the law to the top of that initial art study, right? So rather than sort of dropping arts or anything like that, I thought, why not give law a go as well as part of that, because it was an area I was interested in. And, I was thinking from a practicality perspective in Australia, right? And so it was only, then tech and entrepreneurship sort of became these ideas that I started exploring more when I was in my very early 20s, and seeing that as a viable path. I just don't think in a high school context, certainly no one talks about, there's another sort of third way, which is going beyond the corporate route or something like that, where you might be able to build your own things slowly, or, so that's an interesting pathway that only arose out of just sort of some luck along the way, and some maybe initially what I thought of as bad luck turned into good luck over time,
Oh, that's interesting, Zach, because I've always been of the opinion school, it's a miracle, I say, that entrepreneurs come out of the education system, because it does not sort of show it, does not highlight it, does not sort of make it. And unless you get exposed somehow, like I was fortunate, I had a father who was a small business accountant and small business advisor. So at 12 years old, I was selling soft drink at the beach and, starting little businesses. But I noticed and I realized the school certainly didn't encourage it, didn't foster that entrepreneurial thing. What was like that external force that you saw? Was it podcasts? Was it content? Was it a book you read? Or how did you get the spark?
Yeah, look, I think probably it's a bit of a range of things. So whilst I wasn't necessarily thinking too much about the tech world just coming out of high school, I was really still always interested in tech growing up. Like, even from a perspective of like, some of my hobbies in tech and self-built computers and doing stuff like that on the side, where I was also just, I think, raised in a generation where, like, I'm 25. So I suppose raised in that generation where YouTube content, self-taught content was like a common thing, where if you wanted to go and educate yourself on a topic, increasingly there's this array of resources like at your fingertips. So even if it's something outside of school, something linked to your school studies, you could do that. And I think it's more like over time, not only do you have some of those sensibilities built in, but the real shift definitely became that, yeah, as I began to sort of look at options outside of just more traditional career paths, yeah, there is a lot of content now catering to that through podcasts, through YouTube, etc. And importantly, you know, there's vehicles to learn. So I think, you know, compared to 30 years ago, if I look at my, you know, father's generation and then grandfather before that, it's the opportunity just was not there to, you know, sort of have a more scalable, global business opportunities that are now possible for anyone who sort of has access to the internet and a good computer and some sort of free time at their fingertips, maybe outside of their employment. So yeah, like probably there was a few catalysts just in that period of time where I was looking at other opportunities, and I think COVID was a great time where for a lot of people it inspired a bit of free time to just look at other materials, other ways of being and living, and like you know, I was inspired by some of the people as well who I could see in my immediate network were maybe having had successfully had a go at entrepreneurship and stuff as well, and maybe not taken just an immediate traditional path, or you know, sort of switched off across a couple of things as well in their life, you know. Yeah.
And so, and I'm on your LinkedIn at the moment, so I presume you're okay with what you've written on there, because there's something with your Bachelor of Laws at University of Sydney, and then it says, dropped out of law stream to dedicate my full time and attention on HABEAS / building legal tech. Was that like a steady thing? And was there any awkward conversations with family or anyone like, hey, I'm dropping out, I'm going to go full time into this?
Yeah, so I think definitely was a very steady thing, and it was also motivated a bit by external circumstances as much as it was internal. So I think firstly, the fact that in my sort of university period, I'd had that sort of unusual catalyst of sort of having to transfer from the university. That's the sort of path that I thought that I was on, having to switch things up a bit. Like that created some awkwardness in regards to things like university credits, where there were certain university credits that I actually wasn't afforded for my year of study in Cambridge. So it kind of felt like when I transferred to Australia, that wasn't recognized, even though it was sort of arts degree. So there was some interesting stuff going on there where it was like, it definitely, there was some funny trade-offs, but then that actually having that external feeling of, you know, a lack of control in regarding to that, and sort of, oh, that's a bit unfair maybe, because I put that year of study in. But in contrast, entrepreneurship and like sort of building your own thing felt like, you know, there is some control here. There's a lot more autonomy and freedom, like how hard you work and what you put in is roughly linked to what you get out. Of course, that's depending on your skill and your background, of course, as I came to learn, right? Like you're not going to learn straight away. So I think as well in 2024, by that time, I'd sort of been only doing HABEAS part-time in 2023 and still studying. And it had become clear that there'd actually been some really great opportunities. Like we landed a pilot with a Big Six firm in 2023 towards the tail end. And it was like, oh, you know, this is just me right now as a business, but perhaps there could be a growth trajectory here. Perhaps I'm onto an interesting problem. Even if the product wasn't good enough at that point in time, because it was just like an MVP, there was those little kernels of, you know, there's a lot to be learned here and a lot to be done. And, you know, I didn't officially drop out at the time. It was like a deferment process. So there was still a lot of leeway that if I'd made an incorrect or the wrong call at that time, I could have, you know, gone back and just sort of finished on the law side of my degree and gone down that path again. But yeah, I think that's kind of the long and short of it, which was like it was a steady growth period. And then as I saw more external points of validation for the sort of AI space and some of the stuff I was building, I thought, yeah, this seems like the right call for what we need to do to get the most out of the business as well, right? Like, as you know, if you're just sort of dedicating 20, even 30 hours, it's often not enough to, when you are a small team, when you are just starting out, and you probably experienced that firsthand as well.
Yeah. Oh, I've found the territory. It's you wear all the hats, you do all the things, and you grind it out. And I think we've chatted about this off the air, but focusing your attention, I've realized there's such a, the fact is we've all got, I call it 168 tokens in the week, which is the hours. And the more you put in, like there's competitors out there, there's other people, and the more hours, man hours that are put in, yes, it's getting easier with AI, but you still got to put in the actual human hours, and more importantly, your attention on, I'm going to solve this problem that I've seen. And that's what I wanted to ask you with HABEAS. Was it, because obviously in law school, like first couple of years, it's all about research. Like that is, you nearly spend the first 2 full years. Most of the degree, I say, is like 80% just learning how to search and find information. You would have obviously had access to the main players. And was it something you like, I think with AI, I could do this better? Like, where did the idea come into your brain that, hey, maybe there's a better way of doing this?
Yeah, that definitely. I think it was informed by personal experience that, like, in some ways, I think I'm not like in any way a sort of hater of traditional legal search, because I think in some ways it's quite amazing. And you can sometimes, even with Boolean and keyword search type technologies, you can achieve some incredible things, particularly if you compare to like pre-digitization of case law, where, you know, some of my clients are people who would relate to me that, like, it was not so long ago that they were just doing law from textbooks, and it was all manual photocopying and going to the library to and all sorts of complications involved with that for finding recent decisions, right? So yeah, but I did see that AI would present this sort of more conversational, intuitive user interface, especially with the rise of LLMs getting more popular in early 2023. Obviously, they've been around, but ChatGPT also commoditized and brought the idea to life in a more interesting interface than what people were used to, and it sort of took off a little bit. And I saw a lot of opportunities there, but also more on the search side, the legal search side, which is also important for the architecture of HABEAS, which is, you know, emerging things like semantic search, which again had been around, but was sort of starting to reach a pinnacle or a better degree of reliability at that period of time. And it's sort of like, okay, well, if we can marry some of these technologies, what we can hopefully get to over the long run is a more intuitive and more sort of conversational way to engage with the law and to derive insights from it. But I just didn't know quite what that would look like, of course, so early on. It was more like the bones of understanding that there is a lot of frustration here around traditional search tools and traditional research, and it can be a sluggish and grindy experience at times that is unintuitive to a lawyer. And a lawyer is not necessarily, yeah, some lawyers are coders if you're in like IP law, but majority are not, and they're not wanting to think like an engineer. But a lot of traditional legal search sort of forces you to think a bit like an engineer, like translate what's in your head into a keyword search, right? And, you know, wouldn't it be great, I was thinking at the time, of if we could have a system that, while still reliable and trained on real law, could sort of help solve that problem, make it more intuitive natural language search for the queries you have in your head.
Because I think, and it's a good point, because I remember I didn't practice for long at all, but I was a law clerk for quite a while, and all that research on cases and stuff. And there's a point, because it's got to be commercially viable to do more research. And that's what I like about a tool like this, is you can do a lot more research, because ultimately what I learned was, if you spend enough time and if the client has enough funds for the lawyers to spend the time, you will find precedent. You will find cases that back up your argument to hopefully get it over the line. And that's why, unfortunately, justice at the moment is a little bit of who's got the deeper pockets. But I go, if this sort of levels it to go, well, you can do what might have taken you walking to the library, doing that, or even learning the search terms, finding it, reading the cases. With your stuff, it's condensing that time into what might have been days of research into hours, or if not minutes. That's only should have a positive impact on justice, is what I hope to see.
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword at the moment with access to justice, in the sense that I think you have these two different sides of the equation, which is, on the one hand, if you speak to a lot of people from CLCs, they will say the same thing, which is like, ultimately, AI has its problems and its associated inefficiencies, but it's a net positive, because either A, in the first instance, someone has access to at least resources and a greater understanding of things than maybe even on their own, even without being able to consult a lawyer if they don't have the capital or the money to do so. And B, it might make it easier for someone to sort of empower themselves to understand a bit more about the law, and maybe go to a CLC with a slightly more informed framework or view of things. But of course, you've got the other side of the equation, is that you've got, you know, chief justices and judges remarking on the amount of strain on the courts for, in particular, like sovereign citizens or sort of some self-represented litigants, right? And how that this is imposing like a sort of a strain in certain areas. And so I do see it as long-term if sort of adopted responsibly, and especially if we can get the right tools out there to self-represented litigants as well as to community legal centers and stuff. Yeah, there's so much potential and opportunity for AI to be this great search tool, this great way to give people a higher degree of knowledge and understanding and access to the law, so they actually just understand like what does the legislation say. You know, even just at a basic level, that's such an issue. Is like people can't navigate the legislation because it seems to be changing all the time, and it can be confusing for a small business or something like that, right? So I do see so much potential there. It's just going to be about the way that, for example, government and even law firms themselves choose to adopt and sort of implement AI. And will that go in a direction where it's like it actually hinders access to justice because the people at the top sort of get access to the best tools? Or is it going to be just an enabler in terms of how we sort of roll it out, and you know, which tools are chosen to sort of promote to people and self-represented lists? Yeah, I could go on so much about that. I won't, but yeah, it's a really
no, but it's a deep, and that's I wanted to talk to you about it because it's a deep, to me, philosophical and societal level issue that we have to grapple with. And I think without having conversations about it, you can sort of just keep going down this path like, yeah, more AI, more this, more this. I'm like, well, hold on. Is this going to create, like, we're already, there's issues with social inequality and that sort of thing. You go, well, if you put the tools, the better technology in the hands of only a few, how is that going to work? With HABEAS, is your goal, like the long-term vision, is it a lawyers only tool, or is it a bit of a tool that can be used more broadly?
Yeah, so far the vast majority of our marketing, our positioning, the people we have conversations with, you know, the people we are piloting with are law firms, right? And even, you know, so far the real adoption has come more from sole practitioners and small law firms, but now increasingly larger firms are looking at the research piece and recognizing the need for more sort of specialized tools in that domain. So I think that has been the key focus and probably will continue to be. But saying that, along the way, I've definitely like made some connections with entities in Australia that do this kind of work or are looking at these problems of how can AI be used to empower access to justice. Like, you know, the National Justice Project is one, and you know, I've got relationships with people at Uni of New South Wales who are working on this. So yeah, I do see it as there's a lot of potential there. It's just about the right rollout and the right sort of way of doing that. The other thing is that because we have a self-serve platform online, you know, people can sign up and they can do a free trial. And, you know, oftentimes the free trial is not really enough to fully get your foot in the door, but it's something for someone to just sort of, if they have some time to test out the tool. And we do see some self-represented lits and some people outside of just professional lawyers who will sign up to that and become subscribers. And then their needs might be different. It might be like, you know, again, just navigating the law on an issue and getting a sense, even if it's a snapshot of the law, can give them a lot more to work with. And I do think some of those people have related to me that, you know, they've gotten great value from it for different sort of contexts, which is awesome to see. But of course, I just still see it as, at the moment, because there are still issues with AI, because there's still limitations. You know, that having that legal training and legal background doesn't mean that you can like wield a research tool the most effectively in a way. And yeah, it's just it's a really interesting pathways. Like maybe we can expand a version of the product, or you know, look at other ways to reach those other parts of the market, but do it in like a responsible way that isn't just sort of have at it. Because there are sort of like occasionally mistakes I notice, like in terms of the way that the verbiage or like the search terms that say a self-rep versus a lawyer might use, or the expectations out of an AI tool, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's, it is an important one to for me to ask you, because you're at the cutting edge of it, actually engineering this stuff at the moment, particularly with LLMs. Is there any way to mitigate like 100% there will never be a hallucination, or is it you can minimize the risk significantly, but there is always going to be that slight risk in there that it will come out with a bad result or a hallucination, a made up result, I guess.
Yeah, so to me, I think it's more about like being, I guess, very careful around the definition of hallucination as well, because I think
Yep.
you can speak to 10 different people, they'll sort of be having a different categorization of that term. So I think with tools like HABEAS, we've done a really good job of, I would call it, as you said, mitigating that risk very significantly. And that's because the architecture will always sort of call upon a real search result, a real case law reference. Like through the UI, you can actually physically validate if a case is cited, where did that come from? You can double check it yourself to ensure that no mistake has been made, and you can go to the original source and things like that. So we do a really good job on that perspective of just ensuring it's actually using real case or real legislation. But I also still think, and this is a problem where we're doing a lot of engineering work to try and again mitigate this and make this better, but there are still instances where even with a platform with HABEAS, it might overstep its mark. For example, a person is asking for any cases that relate to XYZ, and HABEAS might retrieve 5 cases, and it might sort of overinterpret a little bit the relevance of a particular case. Like it might make a claim that is kind of supported, but it's quite subjective, or it's an overshoot of, and those are the sorts of things that I see as like not necessarily a hallucination, but it's engineering things that would be different to the way that a lawyer would conceptualize that problem or read that case, right? It sort of goes back to the old thing of like, a bad lawyer versus a good lawyer. A bad lawyer might just read the cash notes, like they might just look at that and be like, oh yeah, okay, this is good, this is a good authority. And then versus like a learned barrister who would do an incredible amount of deep dive research, etc. So that's the sort of thing I still think there's a way to go on. And then the other thing is, again, HABEAS, there's also going to be instances where you mitigate the hallucination risk substantially, but then, if a model is sort of pushed beyond its limits, or if someone sort of takes it in a direction that the tool is definitely not trained for that use case, then it would perform less well. Like there is a potential sort of for breakage and slippage with LLMs in general, I think. So yeah, like definitely it matters a great deal whether someone is using a tool that like HABEAS or similar that actually gives references to real authorities, that trains on real case law and legislation. That matters a great deal, but there's still like a checking element to that. There's still an element of, reading cases deeply. I think that's never going to be lost in the profession. And yeah, it's just something we're thinking about consistently on the design side, like just to get that better and better over time.
Well, and I'm thinking as you were explaining it, and you're right, that definition of hallucination is so vital. I was like, it sounds like, I remember going to a partner with a case and with a little paragraph that I thought, oh, look at this, like this blows this out of the water. I found this site. And then he's like, read 3 paragraphs below that, mate. And then I was like, oh, and then it completely contradicts it. And I was like, it just sounds like it's a grad student or a first year lawyer. And over time, that's why you have these levels in law. The more experience you get, the more the judge might have said that there, but then they actually clarified 6 paragraphs later that no, that wasn't it. It sounds like it's like having a first year student, but over time, as you said, the more you train it, it's only going to get better and better.
Yeah, look, for sure. I think the first year student analogy kind of holds, but then it's also it's a good way to sort of put a common conceptual framework and that people can kind of resonate with. But at the same time, there's things a first year law student, even at that level, can do that HABEAS can't do. And then there's things that HABEAS can do that a first year law student or even a senior lawyer could never do. So I think seeing it as AI has its strengths in terms of the capacity. For example, a lawyer could not search over hundreds of thousands of documents and case law down to the subparagraph in a second in the way that HABEAS can, right? And present those paragraphs in a list of sources. That would take them many hours and manual review. But at the same time, HABEAS, wouldn't be able to accomplish some of the things that, a senior lawyer in terms of putting together a really unique argument or framing of a case or thinking about, the right synthesis of certain materials, or making those choice judgments about like, is one authority better than another here? Like, not just, is this a decent reference point? Those are things that, LLMs and AI can still struggle with, even though they can do a reasonable sort of first pass at those sorts of things. So yeah, that's the way I kind of view it, is like there's complementary strengths on either side of the equation. And in some ways, the future is going to be people are using AI as like this sort of strategic partner, this second set of eyes, this thing which is they're still steering the ship, but it can traverse such a range of law and material. And it's like a problem solving equation as well, right? Like that's kind of how I see it, rather than people, if they come to HABEAS, with the expectation of, look, this first question I want answered, it's a super complex question, and I just want HABEAS to one-shot it and do this work that would take me like 10, 12 hours. Yeah, they're going to walk away disappointed, because there's actually a navigation process as well. Like there's an iterative prompting process where you're pointing a model just like you would with any real human researching in different directions, sort of going down a path. So there's still that skill as well to how people leverage AI, I think, and how they get the most out of it for their practice. Yeah, so it's all a very interesting area, and it's like seeing how tools like HABEAS will develop is going to be for 2026 and 2027 as LLMs continue to rapidly improve, but also as the underlying search technology, I think, which is often forgotten. But that's something that's crucial to powering HABEAS, Harvey, Legora, like even those bigger like commercial sort of document analysis type tools are also going to be having like incredibly complex search pipelines, one would assume, in terms of their architecture, whether they're doing research, whether they're doing discovery, whatever it may be. So yeah, it's going to be a really exciting time to see also how the tech keeps getting better in the next few years.
Yeah, and because you've been, and sort of recently in terms of, it's only been a few years since you've launched this, and also a few years since you were a law student, have you thought of, like, with grads, I know if I were a grad right now, I'd be nervous, because there's so much talk in the news. A lot of the articles are about, like, effectively, and the way I hear lawyers, senior lawyers, talk about how they use some of these different tools is like, it's just like having a PLT or a first year grad. What do you say, I guess, to grads? How can they sort of ensure they still have a future in law, but also are able to learn this fundamental skills to be a lawyer?
Yeah, it's a complex question. I think, some of the skill set might change. I do believe in the notion of people learning a range of tools. So if, in the area of research, which I know well, yes, it's like learn a tool like HABEAS, but then also make sure you're learning a tool like Jade or Ostley or traditional search platforms as well. Like, don't sort of feel like you can necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater and sort of completely replace more traditional forms of search or deep research, right? I do think, in a way, see AI as this tool that, because it can get you to the core of material faster, that actually frees up your time to do more deep research and sort of more reading on the things that really matter and are crucial, and develop your skills as a lawyer. So like that is a pathway people can take, but it's also about accountability and sort of this question of, like, as one lawyer framed it to me recently, he calls it laziness, because he uses AI, but he says, like, there's a lazy use and then there's a proactive, accountable use, and that's what he's an advocate for, right? And so I think that's going to become increasingly important, but also realizing, there's opportunities that this presents, right? Like it can mean that when you're a first year or second year lawyer, you might be doing a more strategic work earlier on than sort of 10, 20 years ago, where maybe you were in a discovery dungeon or doing some work like that is quite grueling and sometimes unenjoyable even. And it kind of feels like maybe you're the dog's body within, the firm, right? Like it's there's an exciting potential there that you could be getting into, like, the high echelons of like complex legal work earlier on, because partners, I think, are going to trust people with more. And I also think there's sort of this issue of small law versus big law. I think you'll see a lot of new modalities of law firm or hybrid businesses where, maybe they're a bit smaller, but they employ small, hardworking teams of sort of like people who are really tech first in their approach. And that, is going to create sort of new employment and job opportunities that maybe weren't there. And of course, I still think the larger firms and mid-sized firms, there is still hiring, there is still demand in the labor market right now. But of course, just lawyers in general should, I think it's always just a good thing beyond the practice of law to just sort of become, a generalist in your work, to see and look at other opportunities, like, maybe learn a bit of coding on the side, maybe learn a little bit of sales and business as you've learned, right, in your many years of experience. Like, these other skill sets that mean that you can sort of pivot into other areas adjacent to the law, or that aren't, so I think those are all good things to be looking at. And yeah, the accountability thing is what I often come back to, which is like, I even see this in myself. Sometimes I'll use AI for as a sort of editor over my own writing, but I try and make a concerted effort to write my own piece and sort of leverage something like Claude and say, look, have a look at this. What sucks? What's good? Then I'll make a conscious choice of like, well, maybe I agree with 50% of that, and maybe I don't. Maybe I want to retain the stuff that by an AI standards is poorly written, but maybe it reflects my voice better, right?
Yep.
So, that's the sort of thing that, again, it's a decision versus someone who says, I'm going to generate all my content for LinkedIn with ChatGPT and not sort of generate it, like put any thought into that. And that will reflect in terms of your business outcomes, just as it would reflect for a lawyer who, uses AI in a very unskillful way just to try and replace every element of their work. And that rapidly gets perceived and affects your reputation potentially if you're doing it in the wrong way, right? So yeah, that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but it's just a bunch of stuff off the top of my head in terms of where the profession is going. And I guess for myself as well, it's at least I'm in the space, so I can make a bit of a difference. Like, as if you own a business, you can just make your impact in the right way. Like for us, we haven't tried to overcharge or overpromise with AI and stuff. We've just tried to build a good product that serves a particular niche and helps those people in their day-to-day lives with efficiencies and things that they were struggling with, and that they can get, if they can get a marginal gain or a big gain as well, that's awesome to me. And then I can slowly make a small impact on other little areas as we build those relationships over time, right? So I'd rather kind of be in it rather than sitting on the sidelines saying, oh, the world's going to, everything's falling down and there's nothing we can do, or just being hugely unoptimistic. I'd like to at least have a small role in like, okay, well, maybe we can guide it in the right way. Maybe we can think responsibly about how to leverage and roll out AI in the law. And it doesn't mean my opinions will be listened to. In fact, very often, the more corporate, the sort of people with a lot of massive VC backing, that might be where there's, those sorts of companies, etc., might have the biggest impact in terms of what gets adopted and where things go. But yeah, there's a role for like more grassroots and bootstrapped and businesses like that, I think, to still have an impact.
Oh, and I think like outside of the law with AI, just having AI now for me is it's going to shorten the time frame from someone having a good idea. And for me, entrepreneurship is see a need, fill a need. So I see a problem. Oh, I can solve that problem. Oh, can I solve that problem and exchange some dollars with people for solving the problem for them? And then doing that on repeat. And like, for me, it's as simple as that, whether it's tech or whether it's a mowing a lawn or something. That's what entrepreneurship and scaling is. And AI can allow you to sort of iterate and test, because you don't know, like you said, you had to get to a minimum viable product. And then you go, okay, people do want this. Sweet. Now we'll expand on it. Now we'll improve it. Okay, more people want this. And then obviously we're doing a deal because we want to offer it to the self-employed lawyers league members, the sole pracs in there. But you can do that. Like, that might have taken 5 to 10 years to sort of do that 10 years ago. Now you've managed to do it in 2 years. And that's what I'm seeing, is there's a condensing of time with AI that from idea to execution can be far quicker. And you can actually go, all right, what problem am I solving? And that's what I tell anyone. Just keep, whenever you get a bit distracted and a bit like overwhelmed with the world, there's so much information, there's so much talk, there's so much things happening with AI. I go, yeah, but what problem are you solving? And will AI help you solve that problem for another person? Because as far as I can see, we're still going to exchange value. Maybe it'll be Bitcoin, maybe it'll be some crypto. It won't always be the dollar, but we're still going to exchange value between each other. Me solving problems for you, you solving problems for me. And I think if we just focus back on that, it's a bright future, like you said.
Yeah, 100%. Look, and yeah, your point about what you can do and the leverage, and that is, kind of alludes to what I was saying is, and it actually links to what you're building with Cell Life, is a lot more people deciding to go out on their own or pursue a slightly, but that they've not completely pivoted their career. Like they're still doing what they love, which is practicing the law, but maybe doing it in a way that is a little bit different to the traditional pathway, right? It's like, and that there's entrepreneurship in that as well, right? Like, yeah, it's a validated business. We know that the law is, it's going to be a business for a long time. So it's not like a fundamentally new idea to go out and build a firm, but it requires business skills. It requires all that. So I think because you now have AI to help you a little bit in your practice as a sole prac or a small 1 to 10 seat firm, that could be seen as a massive opportunity. And I, just yesterday was speaking to a lawyer who just like completely dismissed it. And he said, at the end of the day, like I'm doing a, excuse my language, but like an S ton of, work here. And I, AI, if it helps me get through said work 50% quicker, like that is a net gain, for my life, etc., for the work I'm doing, for the work and I do and send to colleagues. And, so we can kind of simplify it in that way, I think. And yeah, see the potential exciting benefits from lawyers who also want to have that entrepreneurial element to the work they're doing as well. I think that's quite exciting to sort of explore that. Yeah.
Now, the last question before I ask you to share, I guess, what Self-Employed Lawyers League members are going to get from HABEAS. Where did the name HABEAS come from?
Yeah, so I mean, initially it was just from the sort of Latin phrase habeas corpus, right? So when you're searching for a company name, there's a lot of considerations. It's kind of like, well, what sort of terms have come before? What sort of domains are available? What's something that could be unique and brandable, like that no one else would necessarily have? I think, so all those factors come into play. And I sort of just ended up I wanted to do something a bit more like a Latin term, a legal term, something that would resonate with lawyers specifically. I still think, habeas is potentially a little bit Americanized, but I also do think, it's sort of one of those ideas where it's meant to only appeal to a certain segment of people. And then it also is something that's a bit different too. There's a lot of sort of, lex and lexum and those sorts of like Latin terms are there in like various legal businesses, right? But I sort of just wanted something that was a bit distinct and, could be brandable, like habeas.ai as a domain as well was there. It was accessible. So yeah, there's a fair few like small factors that come in. But the only other interesting thing there was, I was surprised that over time, like, Harvey came out and actually not a dissimilar name. And they've even got in their logo, it's like a similar sort of black H to the one I've designed in 2023. So I was like, whenever you think you've got something that's like, pretty unique, there's always going to be someone down the road who's thinking a slightly different way. Or, obviously it's not Latin, but it's a similar H sort of sounding name. But yeah, that was just a bit of insight on that.
Yep. No, cool. I always enjoy where a name comes from and where it goes. And ultimately it's about the product. And obviously you got users already. So we're proud to be getting you on as a League Loot member. The League Loot is our members' benefits, our sole practitioners. We're trying to level the playing field to give them the tools they need. Can you tell us what offer and unique thing that our self-employed lawyers inside the league can expect from HABEAS?
Yeah, so effectively, I think in terms of the core offer is that they can receive discounted access to the self-serve version of HABEAS on like the professional tier subscription. And so when they log into HABEAS, they'll be able to sort of submit a promotion code, like a discount code at checkout, and it's all quite easy and accessible. It sort of doesn't necessarily apply if they're part of a much bigger firm, but in terms of if they are just accessing HABEAS through the self-serve, that's like a massive benefit. And it also gives them that capacity to sort of trial it at a lower risk initially, and then sort of see does it become a mainstay in their day-to-day work. And additionally, over time, sort of the idea is we're also there to help with just AI enablement in general. So provide advice to members within the Cell community who are looking for other AI tools or just how to get the most out of AI and sort of learn about how these tools work under the hood. We want to provide as part of their membership in your community, they'll get access to those sort of seminars and webinars that do those deep dives, right? from someone like myself who can kind of navigate that sort of chasm between law and tech, which is often, it's a really hard one because lawyers are not busy researching AI and the techie side of things. And so there's also a training and onboarding element, which we're going to be helping and assist people with. And I think also, if you're a sole practitioner, you'll be able to get it's a 25% from recollection discount on that self-serve membership if you're a continued subscriber and a member of the Cell Life. So yeah, I think just in the future, it's still, of course, early days right now, end of 2025, but could go in other directions. There could be other things we see as synergies down the road to explore. You just never know. It depends as lawyers needs evolve as well.
No, we're very excited and proud to have you on board, because that's what we can see. Obviously, I can see there's massive potential in the software. It's going to help these lawyers, for me, deliver a better quality of product. Ultimately, they're trying to solve a problem for their clients. They're going to be able to solve problems faster for their clients. If they can do that, they can do more BD, and I'll show them how to get the clients. And effectively, you help them service the clients and get, ultimately, a bigger picture thing aside from money, for me, is a better justice system. If lawyers, the best lawyers are out there practicing law they love, that they're truly passionate about, and they have tools like yours, I just can't see how this is going to be a net negative in any way, shape or form. Might be a bit messy the next few years as we figure it out, but that's what we're excited to have someone like you sort of take lawyers on the journey. And it is like you said, it's a conversation. It's an ongoing, is this working? Is this not working? How can we make it work better? As we all know, in founder territory of a new company, it's all about how quick can you fail and then get back up and solve it and reiterate and improve.
Yeah, 100%. And as a side note, obviously, before we end, I think, I've been, the only reason I was interested in the partnership is just because I've seen, through my relationship with you, that I know it's not an easy industry necessarily to get a business off the ground in because it can be a risk averse and sometimes slower moving industry at times. But there is so much opportunity. So the fact that you hunkered down there and sort of saw a real problem and one that you could bring your skill set to help people how to learn business and that side of things, I think, yeah, that's pretty exciting to me. So I, really take my hat off to anyone who's able to do that successfully and already getting great results in your community. So yeah, hats off, and excited to see what happens in 2026.
Yeah, fantastic. Last thing, and we'll put this in the show notes anyway, but how does someone find out about HABEAS? I think you already said it, and also how do they get in touch with you if anyone wanted to have a quick chat?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to sort of find out more about HABEAS is through the website, which is habeas.ai. And that also gives people a sign-up portal. So if they click try HABEAS, they'll be triaged through to app.habeas.ai, which is where the application layer is hosted. And they can actually sign up to an account and get a 14-day free trial if they are someone using it in a self-serve capacity, or if they're representing a firm, they can book a demonstration through the website. So it's pretty simple. There's a lot of information and sort of blog posts about HABEAS and what we do on there. In terms of getting in contact with me, they can just shoot me an email at, Will McCartney, CC at habeas.ai, or they can sort of get in touch over LinkedIn and just have a chat there. So I'm definitely pretty accessible and try to make myself accessible even for our self-serve members, and doing onboarding workshops and stuff like that for people who request it. So yeah, I keep myself available for a chat with anyone, really. Yeah.
No, fantastic. Thank you, Will. I'm sure this won't be the last conversation we have.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Jason. Really appreciate it.